When my vice president looked me dead in the eye and handed my massive promotion to my hopelessly incompetent brother-in-law, I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply smiled, packed my desk, and drove home in total silence. 72 hours later, my phone was paralyzed by 90 missed calls, and a billion-dollar financial technology empire was actively burning to the ground. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old, and if you have ever been told you are too essential to be promoted, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you are definitely going to want to hear exactly how I let the people who tried to bury me dig their own federal graves. You are incredibly hardworking, Chloe, but for the senior director position, we need someone with real leadership vision, someone who naturally commands a room. Therefore, the promotion is going to Marcus. Vice President Richard Sterling finished his sentence, his voice echoing loudly inside the glass-enclosed boardroom of Aura Pay. The 55-year-old executive carelessly tossed my flawless annual performance review aside, letting the thick stack of papers slide across the polished mahogany table. I sat completely still, my hands folded perfectly in my lap, processing the absolute betrayal that had just left his mouth. I slowly turned my head to look at the man sitting directly across from me. Marcus, my 33-year-old brother-in-law, leaned back in his expensive ergonomic leather chair as an African-American man with $1 million smile and a silver tongue. Marcus had always possessed an unearned arrogance that charmed exactly the wrong kind of corporate executives. He was an absolute master at taking credit for other people's late nights, specifically my late nights. For the past 2 years, I had quietly covered his massive mistakes, fixed his broken financial reports, and managed his angry client calls just to keep the peace at family dinners. Right now, that arrogance was on full display. He smirked at me, his eyes dancing with pure triumph. Click, click. The sound broke the heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Marcus was repeatedly clicking a black and silver pen. It was a $500 Montblanc pen, the exact same pen I had purchased for him as a congratulatory gift 2 years ago when I personally pulled strings to get him hired at this very company. He had been drowning in debt, and I had risked my own professional reputation to vouch for him. Now he was sitting across from me, stealing the executive promotion I had worked 80-hour weeks to secure. "Do not take it too hard," Chloe, Marcus said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying his hardest to look like the authoritative leader he clearly believed he was. He lowered his voice, weaponizing our family ties right in front of the vice president. "Jessica is due in just 2 months, Chloe. You know she is stressed. We really need to close on that massive house in the Hamptons so the baby has a proper nursery, and I need this executive salary to qualify for the mortgage. You are single. You do not have a family to support right now. It is your duty to step aside and help your sister out." He paused, giving Richard a knowing nod before turning his condescending gaze back to me. "But you are still an essential part of the operational structure, Chloe. I am really going to need you to stay on my team to handle all those boring predictive algorithms. You are just so good at the tedious background stuff." The tedious background stuff he was referring to was the proprietary artificial intelligence architecture I had coded from scratch. The very system currently keeping Aura Pay's billion-dollar transactions afloat. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or demand an explanation. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. The puzzle pieces were rapidly snapping together in my mind. This was not just a corporate oversight. This was a calculated family conspiracy. The echo of a phone call from the previous night suddenly rang loud and clear in my memory. My mother had called me right as I was finalizing my presentation for this exact role. Her tone had been urgent and demanding. She had commanded me to sabotage my own career so her golden child daughter could have a perfect suburban life funded by a husband who could not even write a basic data query. I had refused her demand last night, but clearly my mother had found another way. She must have pressured Marcus to go behind my back and smooth-talk Richard on the golf course to steal the role I had basically invented. They expected me to argue. They expected me to beg for scraps, or maybe offer to train Marcus while he took all the credit and the massive salary bump. Richard looked at me, fully expecting total compliance. Marcus kept clicking that expensive pen, waiting for me to nod and accept my permanent place in his shadow. They believed employees, especially loyal family members, would always accept mistreatment to keep the peace. They were both completely and entirely wrong. Before I could even process the absolute audacity of his demand, a sharp vibration rattled loudly against the polished mahogany table. My smartphone screen illuminated, cutting through the heavy tension in the glass boardroom. It was a text message from my mother, Susan. I glanced down at the glowing screen, reading the words that instantly confirmed just how deep this betrayal ran. "Sign the algorithm handover papers to Marcus immediately," her text read. "Do not make a scene and do not embarrass this family. Jessica is highly stressed today and the baby cannot handle it. Be a good sister for once and do what you are told." I stared at the digital message. The psychological siege was fully coordinated and flawlessly timed. My family had weaponized my mother to ensure I would be too emotionally broken to fight back against the corporate theft happening right in front of me. Richard cleared his throat loudly, clearly irritated that my attention had shifted to my phone. He reached into his thick leather portfolio and pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents. He slapped the papers onto the table and pushed them forcefully across the wood until they stopped directly in front of my folded hands. "This is a formal intellectual property transfer and system handover agreement." Richard stated, his voice completely devoid of any professional courtesy. "Since Marcus is officially taking over the senior director position today, he is going to need full administrative control over the predictive customer artificial intelligence system. We need you to sign these papers right now, relinquishing your access and officially transferring the source code to his department." Marcus leaned forward, offering another sickeningly sweet smile. "Do not worry," Chloe, Marcus said smoothly. "I will make sure the information technology guys give you a nice little dashboard so you can still monitor the daily logs for me. But as the executive in charge of the Megatrust bank account, I need to legally own the underlying architecture." I looked down at the legal documents. They wanted me to sign away my artificial intelligence system. They spoke about the software as if it was just another standard company asset, like a corporate laptop or a rolling office chair. But the predictive customer artificial intelligence system did not belong to AuraPay. It did not belong to Richard, and it certainly did not belong to Marcus. I built that system entirely on my own, 2 years ago when the company was hemorrhaging major clients because of massive transaction delays. I spent my nights and weekends writing a highly advanced machine learning algorithm. I coded it from scratch on my personal computer in my own apartment, running it on my own private servers. AuraPay never paid me a single dime to develop it. My employment contract specifically listed my title as a strategy manager, not a software engineer. I never signed a secondary development clause, and I never transferred ownership to the corporation. I had simply granted the company a free, revocable license to use my architecture because it made my daily workload manageable and kept the clients happy. Over the past 2 years, my system had single-handedly saved the Megatrust bank account by predicting transaction bottlenecks before they ever happened. It processed billions of dollars flawlessly every single day. Marcus took all the credit for the incredible retention numbers, claiming his brilliant client relationship skills kept Megatrust happy. But the truth was, my code was doing all the heavy lifting while Marcus was out drinking expensive scotch on the company dime. And now they wanted to steal the machine itself. Richard tapped his thick finger impatiently against the glass table. "We are on a tight schedule here," Chloe, Richard demanded. "Megatrust Bank is expanding their financial portfolio with us next week, and Marcus needs to present the new artificial intelligence integration to their chief executive officer. Sign the handover agreement so we can get Marcus properly onboarded before lunch." They were completely blind to their own ignorance. They genuinely believed that because I was a loyal employee and an obedient daughter, I would simply hand over a multi-million-dollar piece of proprietary software just to make my brother-in-law look good. My mother was texting me to surrender. My boss was ordering me to surrender. My brother-in-law was smiling, waiting to collect the spoils of my grueling hard work. Marcus noticed my silence. He sighed heavily, perfectly playing the role of the exhausted, benevolent family man. "Come on, Chloe." Marcus pushed his voice, dropping into a manipulative whisper. "Susan already talked to you about this, right? She told me she was going to text you. Do not make this difficult. Jessica is at the doctor right now getting an ultrasound. If I do not get this promotion and this software officially under my name today, the bank is going to pull our mortgage approval. You would literally be making your pregnant sister homeless." Homeless. I was using the word homeless while wearing a $2,000 custom-tailored suit and holding a $500 pen. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Richard leaned heavily over the table, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "If you refuse to sign this handover, Chloe, I will consider it a direct act of corporate insubordination." Richard threatened, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are an at-will employee. I can have security escort you out of this building in exactly 5 minutes. You will lose your health insurance, your stock options, and your reputation in the financial technology sector. I will personally make sure you never work in Silicon Valley again." The two men stared at me, forming a unified front of patriarchal bullying and corporate extortion. They had cornered me in a glass room fully armed with family guilt and severe professional threats. They expected me to break. They expected the tears to fall, followed by a defeated signature on the dotted line. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a terrified, helpless victim. They did not realize they were trying to rob a woman who held the absolute kill switch to their entire corporate empire. I did not offer them a single syllable of argument. I did not defend my hard work, and I certainly did not beg for my rightful position. Instead, I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and completely silent. I reached up to the lapel of my tailored blazer and unclipped my corporate employee badge. The plastic identification card felt incredibly light in my hand. I tossed it directly onto the polished mahogany table. It landed right on top of the intellectual property transfer agreement with a sharp smack. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes, watching his smug smile instantly falter just a fraction. Then I looked at Richard, whose face registered a sudden, massive flicker of confusion. They had cornered me expecting total compliance, and my silence completely short-circuited their entire strategy. I turned my back on both of them, pushed open the heavy glass door, and walked out of the boardroom. "Wait!" Marcus hissed from behind me. His leather shoes slapped frantically against the floor as he scrambled out of his chair. I kept walking down the long carpeted hallway toward my desk in the main bullpen. "Chloe, stop this right now," Marcus whispered fiercely, catching up to me and trying to grab my arm. "You are making a massive scene. You are embarrassing the family. Are you even listening to me?" I ignored him and kept my eyes fixed forward. Marcus stepped into my path, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and sheer panic. He was losing control of the narrative, so he immediately deployed his favorite weapon. "Jessica is carrying your niece," Marcus hissed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "She is pregnant and highly emotional. If you walk out of this building and ruin my promotion today, the bank will cancel our mortgage approval. You are literally stealing a home from an unborn child. You cannot just throw a selfish tantrum and quit because you did not get your way. Get back in that room and sign the papers." Before I could completely bypass his pathetic guilt trip, the boardroom doors slammed open. Richard stormed out into the hallway. His face was a dangerous shade of purple. The entire floor of cubicles suddenly went dead silent. Every single employee stopped typing and stared at the executives, losing their minds. "You listen to me very carefully, Chloe," Richard shouted, pointing a thick finger directly at me for the entire office to see. "You do not just walk out of my office. You do not throw your badge on my table. If you walk out that door today, I will personally make sure you never work in corporate financial technology again. I know every major player in Silicon Valley. I will make one phone call and your career is permanently over. You will be completely blacklisted from here to the coast." A heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the open office. My coworkers stared at me with wide eyes, waiting for me to apologize, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of a powerful executive destroying my professional future. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Richard. Instead, I simply sidestepped Marcus and reached my desk. I grabbed a small cardboard box and dropped my favorite coffee mug inside. But I did not reach for company files or corporate property. I reached for the one item on my desk that truly mattered, my personal laptop. I opened the sleek silver device and flipped the screen up. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice trembling slightly. He tried to look over my shoulder, but I angled the screen away from his line of sight. I was executing a sequence I had prepared for months, just in case this exact scenario ever played out. AuraPay handled billions of dollars in daily transactions for Megatrust Bank, but their legacy software was a tangled, broken mess. For the past 2 years, the entire company had been running smoothly, strictly because of my proprietary predictive algorithm. Richard thought the corporate technology department built it. Marcus told everyone he managed it, but I owned the source code outright through my private limited liability company. I had merely granted AuraPay a free revocable license to use it. My fingers danced across the keyboard. 10 keystrokes. That was all it took. I navigated to the administrative dashboard of my private server. I clicked the master control panel. I initiated the revocation protocol. I deactivated the access keys connecting my private server to the OraPay corporate mainframe. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. A small green checkmark appeared on my screen confirming the total digital disconnection. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap and placed it carefully into my cardboard box. I placed my charger on top of the closed laptop. I picked up the box. It weighed almost nothing. I turned to face Marcus, who was standing frozen in my workspace. His arrogant posture had completely vanished, replaced by a rigid stiffness. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a slow, chilling smile. It was a smile completely devoid of warmth, a predatory look that finally made him step backward. He suddenly realized he had absolutely no idea how to actually do the job he just stole. Without my system running in the background, his executive promotion was totally worthless. I walked past Richard without a single word. My heels clicked against the concrete floor, echoing loudly in the completely silent room. I kept my head high and my posture perfect. I walked straight to the elevator bank and pressed the down button. The polished metal doors slid open. I stepped directly into the elevator. I turned to face the bullpen as the heavy metal doors glided shut, cutting off my view of Richard's red face and Marcus's panicked stare. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of panic. Instead, an icy wave of absolute relief washed over me. For years, I had carried the immense weight of my family's unreasonable expectations, breaking my back to keep the peace, while they eagerly handed my hard-earned achievements to my arrogant brother-in-law. That crushing weight was finally gone. I walked out of the OraPay building, stepped into the bright afternoon sunlight, and inhaled a deep breath of fresh air. I climbed into my car, tossed the cardboard box onto the passenger seat, and drove home in total silence. Richard and Marcus thought they had won. They thought I was just an emotional woman throwing a tantrum over a lost promotion. They thought I was running away to cry in my apartment because I was too weak to handle corporate pressure. They genuinely believed I had just surrendered my career. They had absolutely no idea that by typing those 10 keystrokes, I had just pulled the digital life support on their entire billion-dollar empire. The countdown had officially started, and they were entirely blind to the catastrophic financial detonation heading straight for them. For exactly 72 hours, I existed in a state of absolute, uninterrupted peace. I did not look at a computer screen. I did not check a single corporate email. I spent my weekend going for long runs in the city park and drinking expensive coffee on my balcony. I slept for 8 solid hours a night, completely free from the crushing anxiety of managing Marcus and his endless stream of manufactured disasters. The world outside my apartment continued to spin, but my personal universe was incredibly calm. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through my bedroom blinds. I stretched, walked into my kitchen, and decided the blackout period was officially over. It was time to see the damage. I retrieved my smartphone from the bottom of my purse and plugged it into the charger on my granite countertop. I pressed the power button and waited for the device to boot up. The moment the digital screen illuminated, the phone completely seized up. It began vibrating violently against the counter, emitting a relentless, deafening barrage of notification chimes. The screen exploded with a chaotic flood of red alerts. I picked up the device and looked at the lock screen. 90 missed calls, 214 text messages. The notifications painted a flawless picture of corporate devastation. There were 30 calls from Richard alone. There were 50 calls from Marcus. The rest were from frantic executive board members and my hysterical parents. I bypassed the voicemails and opened my text messages, wanting to read the chronological documentation of their absolute failure. I scrolled back to Friday afternoon, just an hour after I had walked out of the glass boardroom. The first few messages from Marcus were dripping with his usual arrogant condescension. "Chloe, stop throwing a tantrum and turn the system back on. Richard is highly annoyed, but I covered for you. I told him you accidentally locked the server. Send me the administrative password right now so I can fix your mess." He actually believed I had just locked a folder. He had absolutely no idea that the artificial intelligence did not even exist on their company network. I scrolled down to Saturday morning. The tone of his messages had shifted from arrogant annoyance to genuine confusion. "Chloe, answer your phone right now. The Megatrust Bank dashboard is completely dark. The transaction queue is bottlenecking, and I cannot find the source code on the local servers. Where did you hide the predictive algorithm? I have information technology searching the entire corporate database, and they cannot find your files. Call me back immediately. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. My brother-in-law, the newly minted senior director of operations, had spent his entire Saturday realizing he was completely exposed. He was supposed to be the brilliant mind managing the Megatrust bank account, yet he did not even know where the software was physically located. I scrolled down to Sunday evening. The confusion had completely evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Pick up the phone, Chloe. Megatrust is failing massive transactions. Millions of dollars are stuck in the processing pipeline, and the legacy servers are crashing under the weight. Richard is threatening to fire me if I do not get the system online by tomorrow morning. Jessica is crying because the bank called about the mortgage. Turn it on. Please turn it on. And finally, I read the flood of messages that had poured in just hours ago, right as the financial markets opened on Monday morning. AuraPay handled billions of dollars in daily transfers from Megatrust Bank. Without my predictive algorithm automatically calculating bottlenecks and rerouting funds in real time, the entire corporate network had effectively become a blind giant sprinting toward a concrete wall. Total Meltdown Marcus had texted at 6 in the morning. We are losing millions of dollars every single hour. Megatrust Bank is threatening to pull their entire portfolio. You are committing corporate sabotage. Richard called the legal team. We are calling the authorities. You are going to federal prison for cyber terrorism if you do not plug your laptop back in right now. I will make sure they lock you up for the rest of your life. I set the phone down on the counter. His threats were completely hollow, born out of pure desperation. Marcus did not understand intellectual property law, and Richard was just a corporate bully used to terrifying entry-level employees with empty legal jargon. Cyber terrorism implies an unauthorized breach or the destruction of corporate property. I did not destroy anything. I simply stopped giving them my private property for free. There is no judge in the entire country who would indict me for locking the front door of my own house. AuraPay was bleeding millions of dollars by the minute, and the executives were in absolute panic mode. My brother-in-law had been exposed as a total fraud who could not even keep the lights on. The snowball had officially started rolling down the mountain, and it was about to crush every single person who had taken me for granted. Before I could even set my coffee mug into the sink, a violent pounding echoed through my apartment. The knocking was not polite or hesitant. It was a frantic, aggressive hammering against the solid wood loud enough to rattle the picture frames hanging in my hallway. I glanced at the digital clock on my microwave. It was barely 8 in the morning. Nobody visits unannounced at this hour unless they are desperate. Judging by the digital carnage on my phone screen, I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of my front door. I sat at my kitchen island and watched the timeline of his psychological collapse play out exclusively through the text messages on my screen. The progression was absolutely pathetic. The messages from Friday evening were dripping with his standard, unearned arrogance. "Chloe, you made your point," Marcus had texted. "Richard is furious, but I told him you were just being highly emotional. Give me the administrative passwords right now, and I will let you keep your old desk. Do not be stupid about this." He genuinely thought I was throwing a temporary tantrum. He thought he could still play the benevolent manager. But by Saturday afternoon, the tone of his messages shifted violently. The reality of his complete incompetence had finally set in. "Chloe, please pick up your phone," he wrote. "The Megatrust Bank transaction queue is backing up by the thousands. I cannot find the source code anywhere on the corporate mainframe. Where did you hide the servers? I am begging you to call me back. Jessica is crying in the living room because she is terrified we are going to lose the house. I need your help. I will tell Richard you saved us. Just turn the predictive algorithms back on, please." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling zero sympathy for the man who had gladly tried to ruin my career just 24 hours prior. He went from a demanding executive to a begging child in less than one day. But the true desperation arrived on Monday morning, right as the financial markets opened, and AuraPay started losing millions of dollars. His begging mutated into wild, unfounded legal threats. "You are a criminal," his final message read. "The entire banking network is completely paralyzed. Richard has the corporate legal team drafting a massive lawsuit right now. You are committing high-tech corporate espionage and cyber terrorism. When the federal authorities get here, you are going to a federal prison for the rest of your miserable life. Do not think you can sabotage my promotion and get away with it." I set the phone down on the granite counter and smiled. He was throwing around words like high-tech crime and cyber-terrorism because he was completely terrified. He did not understand intellectual property law. He did not realize that I had simply revoked a free license to a piece of software I legally owned entirely. His threats were nothing but the empty barking of a cornered animal realizing his entire fabricated life was about to be slaughtered. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I did not bother looking through the peephole. I reached out, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. My entire toxic family stood in the hallway looking like an angry mob preparing to storm a castle. Before I could even offer a greeting, Marcus shoved past me. He did not ask for permission to enter my home. He simply barged into my sanctuary, bringing the frantic energy of a collapsing corporate empire right into my living room. My parents, Susan and David, filed in right behind him, forming a solid wall of hostility in my entryway. Jessica stood near the back, heavily pregnant and clutching her designer handbag with white knuckles. Marcus was completely unrecognizable from the smug, tailored executive who had smirked at me in the glass boardroom just 3 days ago. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie hung loosely around his neck, and his eyes were bloodshot from a severe lack of sleep. "Fix it!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking as he paced across my living room rug. "You need to fix it right now, Chloe. Turn the system back on. Give me the administrative passwords." I closed the front door calmly, leaning back against the solid wood. "Fix what, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level. "I no longer work at AuraPay. Your operational problems are exactly that, your problems." David stepped forward, puffing out his chest, attempting to project the stern patriarchal authority he thought he still held over me. "Listen to your mother," David demanded, completely ignoring the fact that his son-in-law was having a total meltdown. "You are acting completely out of line. We did not raise you to be this vindictive. Marcus is simply trying to do his job and provide for your sister. Give him the passwords. Apologize for this ridiculous stunt, and we can all move past this immediately." Susan stepped around David, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated outrage. "How can you be so selfish?" she screamed, completely abandoning her usual high society persona. "Marcus is the provider of this family. Jessica is pregnant. They are building a life, a real future, and you are trying to tear it all down because you are miserable and alone. It is just like when you refused to pay off her student loans. You have always been obsessed with watching your sister fail." I stepped directly toward my mother, forcing her to look me in the eye. "You mean the student loans you wanted me to pay using my own college tuition money?" I asked, my voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "You wanted me to empty the bank account I built by working back-to-back night shifts so Jessica could join an expensive sorority she could not afford. That dynamic is completely over. I will not finance Marcus and his unearned corporate success the same way I refuse to finance Jessica and her massive debts." Right on cue, Jessica let out a sharp, dramatic gasp. She stumbled backward, bumping into the wall, and immediately clutched her rounded stomach with both hands. Tears instantly flooded her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "The stress is too much for the baby," Jessica wailed, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "Marcus, it hurts. My stomach hurts so badly. Chloe is doing this on purpose. She wants me to lose the house. She wants me to lose everything." Marcus rushed to her side, wrapping his arms protectively around her shoulders. He glared at me with absolute disgust, completely ignoring the fact that his own spectacular incompetence was the root cause of this entire situation. "Look at what you are doing to your pregnant sister," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing loudly off my apartment walls. "You are a cold, bitter monster." For 32 years, this exact theatrical performance had worked flawlessly. Every single time Jessica cried, every single time my parents called me selfish, I would eventually cave. I would write the check, do the homework, fix the spreadsheet, step aside, and apologize for existing. But not today. Today, the guilt trip that used to paralyze me felt completely powerless and entirely pathetic. I did not panic at the sight of Jessica in distress. I walked directly into my kitchen, picked up my coffee mug from the granite counter, and took a slow sip. "Since we are all gathered here today to discuss Marcus and his thriving career, let us talk about his actual qualifications," I said, maintaining my relaxed posture against the kitchen island. "If you ask him to explain the predictive algorithms running the Megatrust bank account, he will break out in a cold sweat. He does not know how to code. He does not understand the back-end architecture. The only reason that account stayed with Aura Pay is because I personally monitored the transaction routes every single weekend. He got the promotion because he is excellent at taking credit for my late nights. But acting does not reboot a paralyzed financial network. David opened his mouth to launch into another aggressive tirade about family loyalty, but I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked on my father as I unlocked the screen. The family watched me, a sudden wave of uncertainty rippling through their hostile formation. They expected tears. They expected a massive argument. They did not expect absolute icy detachment. I tapped the phone application. I deliberately pressed the number 9, then the number 1, then the number 1 again. I held the illuminated screen up so my father, my mother Jessica, and Marcus could clearly see the 3 digits typed on the display. I hovered my thumb directly over the green call button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my home before I report a break-in," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like breaking glass. "I will tell the dispatcher that 4 hostile individuals have forced their way into my apartment, that they are threatening me, and that I fear for my physical safety. The police station is 3 blocks away. They will be here in less than 5 minutes." Susan gasped, grabbing David by the arm. "Chloe, you would not dare call the police on your own parents." "Try me," I replied, my thumb hovering less than an inch from the button. 20 seconds. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The arrogant entitlement completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating a spotless public image. The mere thought of being escorted out of a residential building in handcuffs by uniformed police officers was a nightmare they could not stomach. "Let us go," David snapped, grabbing Susan by the elbow and shoving her toward the front door. "She is completely unhinged. She has lost her mind." Jessica let out another dramatic wail, clinging to Marcus as they scrambled toward the exit. "You are a terrible sister," Jessica cried, her victim routine completely shattering into genuine fury. "I hope you rot in this apartment." Marcus glared at me with pure venom as he backed out of the doorway. "This is not over, Chloe," he threatened, his voice shaking with desperate malice. "Richard has already contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are going to federal prison. They are going to ruin you." 10 seconds, I counted aloud, never taking my eyes off them. They stumbled out into the hallway, a chaotic mess of cursing and panicked retreats. David slammed my front door shut behind them so hard the walls vibrated. I stood in my living room listening to their frantic footsteps echoing down the corridor. I lowered my phone and deleted the numbers from the screen. The apartment was finally silent again. The invasion was over. I walked over to the front door, engaged the deadbolt, and fastened the security chain. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of victory. I was absolutely ready for war. "Give me the administrative passwords right now." Marcus screamed, his voice breaking, as he paced frantically across my living room rug. "You are ruining everything. Turn the predictive algorithms back on before Richard has me escorted out of the building." I stood leaning against the kitchen island, watching him unravel. "I do not owe you a single line of code, Marcus," I replied calmly. "You wanted to be the senior director. Deal with the crisis yourself." My father, David, took a heavy step forward, his face flushed with patriarchal rage. "You ungrateful rebel!" David barked, his voice echoing in the small apartment. "We did not raise you to be this vindictive. Your brother-in-law is trying to save this family, and you are acting like a spiteful child. You will give him that password right now, or you are no longer a daughter of mine." My mother, Susan, immediately joined the attack, her eyes flashing with absolute disdain. "You have always been completely selfish, Chloe." Susan sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "This is exactly like what happened 5 years ago. We asked you to do one simple thing. We asked you to help pay off Jessica and her student loans so she could start her marriage debt-free. You had the savings. You had the money from your little tech jobs. But you refused to help your own flesh and blood. You are obsessed with watching your sister fail." I stared at my mother, feeling a cold smile form on my face. "You mean the student loans you wanted me to pay using my own hard-earned tuition money?" I asked. "You wanted me to empty the bank account I built by working graveyard shifts so your golden child could live a luxury lifestyle she never earned." I refused to be her bank account back then, and I absolutely refused to be his free software developer today. Right on cue, the theatrical performance began. Jessica let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She stumbled backward against the hallway wall and aggressively clutched her rounded, pregnant stomach with both hands. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, exaggerated agony. "Oh my God!" Jessica wailed, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. The stress. The stress is too much for the baby. Marcus, it hurts so badly." Marcus rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and glaring at me with absolute hatred. "Look at what you are doing," Jessica sobbed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are doing this on purpose. You know the bank is going to cancel our mortgage if Marcus gets fired. You know we will lose the house. You are trying to put me on the street. You are trying to kill my baby with this stress. You want my child to suffer because you are a jealous, bitter woman." The sheer manipulation hanging in the air was suffocating. For 32 years, this exact routine had worked flawlessly. The shouting, the insults, the sudden medical emergencies. They expected me to panic. They expected me to fall to my knees, apologize for causing my pregnant sister pain, and hand over my multi-million-dollar artificial intelligence system just to restore the family peace. But I did not move. I did not flinch. I just took a slow sip of my coffee and watched the pathetic performance run its course. I did not offer them a single apology. I did not drop to my knees and beg for forgiveness. Instead, I took a slow and deliberate sip from my coffee mug. The rich, dark roast grounded me. The frantic yelling and manufactured tears felt like a poorly written television show playing on mute. I was completely unfazed. Since we are all gathered here today to discuss Marcus and his thriving corporate career, let us talk about his actual qualifications. I kept my voice incredibly level, letting it cut through their chaotic noise with the precision of a scalpel. If you ask the newly appointed Senior Director of Operations to explain the predictive algorithms running the Megatrust bank account, he will break out in a cold sweat. He does not know how to code a single line. He does not understand the back-end routing architecture. He spent his days scheduling catered lunches and playing golf with Richard while I managed the entire financial network from my cubicle. The only reason that billion-dollar account stayed with Aura Pay is because I personally monitored their transaction routes every single weekend. Marcus got the promotion because he is excellent at taking credit for my late nights. He is a phenomenal actor just like Jessica. But acting does not fix catastrophic network failures. Acting does not reboot a paralyzed financial system. David opened his mouth to launch into another aggressive tirade, but I did not let him speak. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked directly on my father as I unlocked the screen. The family watched me, a sudden wave of uncertainty rippling through their aggressive formation. They expected tears. They did not expect absolute icy detachment. I tapped the phone application. I deliberately pressed the number 9, then the number 1, then the number 1 again. I held the illuminated screen up so my father, my mother Jessica, and Marcus could clearly see the 3 digits typed on the display. I hovered my thumb directly over the green call button. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my home before I report a home invasion." My voice did not echo or shout, but it carried absolute authority. "I will tell the dispatcher that 4 hostile individuals have forced their way into my apartment, that they are threatening me, and that I fear for my physical safety. The police station is 3 blocks away. They will be here in less than 5 minutes." Susan gasped, grabbing David by the arm. The shift in the room was instantaneous. The arrogant entitlement completely vanished, replaced by sheer panic. My parents had spent their entire lives cultivating a spotless public image. The mere thought of being escorted out of a residential building in handcuffs by uniformed police officers was a nightmare they could not stomach. "Let us go!" David snapped, grabbing Susan by the elbow and shoving her toward the front door. "She is completely unhinged. She has lost her mind." Jessica let out another dramatic wail, clinging to Marcus as they scrambled toward the exit. Her fragile victim routine was completely abandoned now that a real threat was on the table. They stumbled out into the hallway, a chaotic mess of cursing and panicked retreats. But Marcus stopped right at the threshold. He turned back to face me, his expensive suit wrinkled and his eyes wide with desperate malice. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "This is not over." "Chloe," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with venom. "Richard has already contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are going to federal prison for corporate sabotage. You are going to rot in a cell." David slammed my front door shut behind them before I could even reply. I stood in my living room listening to their frantic footsteps echoing down the corridor. I lowered my phone and deleted the numbers from the screen. The invasion was over. I walked over to the door and fastened the security chain. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of victory. Marcus thought the federal authorities were his ultimate weapon. He had absolutely no idea that I was the one who was truly ready to bring the entire empire down. 2 hours after my toxic family fled my apartment, I was sitting in a secluded leather booth at an exclusively upscale steakhouse in downtown Manhattan. This was the kind of restaurant where multi-million-dollar acquisitions were negotiated over dry-aged ribeyes and perfectly chilled martinis. Sitting directly across from me was Evelyn Harper. Evelyn was a ruthless 60-year-old legal shark who specialized entirely in intellectual property and corporate litigation. We had been quietly working together for 2 years, ever since I first realized the massive financial value of the predictive algorithm I was coding for AuraPay. I slid into the booth and immediately placed my phone on the white linen tablecloth. Evelyn took a slow sip of her sparkling water and smiled. "You look remarkably rested for a woman whose former employer is currently making national financial headlines for a catastrophic network failure," Evelyn said, her voice projecting absolute professional confidence. I told her about the morning home invasion and Marcus throwing around the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Evelyn actually laughed out loud. It was a rich, booming laugh that caused a nearby waiter to glance in our direction. "That is absolutely pathetic," Evelyn said, opening her expensive leather briefcase. "Richard and Marcus are completely terrified, and their legal threats are nothing but corporate hot air. They have absolutely zero legal ground to stand on, and they know it." Evelyn pulled out a thick manila folder and laid it squarely between us. "Your paperwork is entirely ironclad, Chloe. When we registered your private limited liability company 2 years ago, we filed comprehensive patents and secured federal copyrights for every single line of source code you generated. We meticulously documented the timestamps proving you built the architecture on your personal servers using your own hardware strictly outside of your contracted working hours at AuraPay. You never signed a non-compete agreement that claimed secondary developments, and you never signed an intellectual property transfer clause. You own the artificial intelligence system outright. AuraPay was operating strictly on a free, revocable end-user license agreement. When you revoked that license on Friday, you were simply closing the door to your own private property. There is no judge in this entire country who would indict you for locking the front door of your own house." I let out a slow, steady breath. The absolute confirmation from a top-tier lawyer felt incredible, but Evelyn did not close her briefcase. The victorious energy radiating from her suddenly evaporated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating seriousness. She reached into her bag again and withdrew a thick black folder sealed with a tamper-evident security tag. She placed it onto the tablecloth with extreme care, treating it like a loaded weapon. "We have a much larger problem," Evelyn said, her tone dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "While monitoring the brute force hacking attempts, AuraPay was running against your private servers over the weekend. I ran a forensic diagnostic on the transaction logs you secured before leaving the building. I wanted to ensure we had a perfect, untampered snapshot of the entire operational history, just in case Richard tried to fabricate data against you." I stared at the black folder. My mouth went suddenly dry. "What did you find?" I asked, leaning closer to the table. Evelyn broke the security seal and opened the folder. She slid a stack of dense, highlighted financial routing logs across the table. I looked down at the numbers. At first glance, it looked like standard freight billing data for Megatrust Bank. But as my eyes adjusted to the complex columns, I realized I was looking at something entirely different. These were shadow transactions. They were buried deep within the automated processing cycle for our largest and most lucrative client. "Your brother-in-law was not just taking credit for your late nights and brilliant algorithms," Evelyn explained, pointing her expensive pen at a specific cluster of highlighted numbers. "Marcus has been extremely busy over the past 6 months. He has been quietly embedding ghost invoices into the Megatrust Bank supply chain. Every time your software successfully routed a massive financial transfer and generated an invoice, Marcus manually intercepted the billing process on the back end. He shaved microscopic fractions of pennies off individual transit costs and redirected those hidden margins." I felt the blood completely drain from my face. I grabbed the papers and pulled them closer. The numbers danced before my eyes. Marcus was embezzling. The golden boy of my family, the man who demanded respect and absolute obedience, was a common corporate thief. But he was not stealing small amounts. The massive volume of transactions Megatrust moved daily meant those microscopic fractions added up to an astronomical figure. He has been siphoning the stolen money into a holding account hidden deep within the AuraPay corporate structure. Evelyn continued, her tone clinical and precise. Over the last 6 months, he has accumulated exactly $2 million. It is currently sitting in a digital vault, waiting to be transferred entirely out of the company. My hands started to shake. $2 million. If Megatrust Bank discovered this massive theft, they would not just pull their contract. They would absolutely destroy AuraPay. They would launch a federal investigation, and everyone involved in the account management would be subjected to severe criminal scrutiny. That included me. Where is the money going? I demanded, my mind racing through the catastrophic implications. That is the terrifying part, Evelyn said. I tracked the destination code attached to the holding vault. It is a one-way routing sequence programmed to dump the entire $2 million into an untraceable offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. But he could not execute the final transfer. Why not? I asked, staring at the damning evidence. Because he lacked the executive security clearance, Evelyn replied. And that brings us to the real reason you were denied your promotion on Friday morning. The realization hit me with the force of a speeding freight train. The glass boardroom, Richard tossing my perfect performance review aside, Marcus smirking as he clicked his Mont Blanc pen. My mother calling me the night before, aggressively demanding that I step aside for the good of the family. The puzzle pieces violently shifted, forming a new, incredibly sinister picture. Marcus did not need the senior director position for the corporate prestige. He did not need it for the corner office or the salary bump to buy Jessica her suburban dream house. He needed the promotion because the senior director title came with a level 5 executive security clearance. He needed that specific administrative access to bypass the final financial firewall wire, the embezzled $2 million to his offshore account, and completely wipe the server audit logs. But that was not even the darkest part of his plan. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking directly onto mine. He knew the missing funds would eventually be flagged during the annual Megatrust corporate audit. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a catastrophic failure to hide his tracks. And he needed a target to take the blame. I stared at the paperwork in absolute horror. He was going to frame me. Evelyn nodded slowly. Once he secured the promotion and transferred the money, he planned to initiate a massive system crash within your proprietary predictive algorithm. He was going to use his new administrative clearance to inject malicious code into the Megatrust transaction grid. I was going to manufacture a massive financial glitch and point the finger directly at the original developer, you. When the federal auditors found the missing money, Marcus would have testified that your software failed and stole the funds. You would have faced federal charges completely alone. The sheer magnitude of his evil plan finally crystallized in my mind. My toxic family had conspired to hand my career to a man actively planning to send me to federal prison. My mother had unknowingly or perhaps knowingly pushed me toward the edge of a cliff to protect a criminal. Marcus had stood in my living room this morning, holding my pregnant sister, acting like a victim, while actively working to destroy my entire existence. You were supposed to be the sacrificial lamb, Evelyn stated very softly. But your unexpected departure accidentally trapped him. By logging out and taking your software offline, you froze his money and completely blocked his escape route. Marcus is not panicking over failing logistics. He is terrified of facing decades in a federal prison cell without you there to take the fall. The revelation hung in the air of the upscale restaurant, thick and suffocating. Marcus was a cornered rat, and now I held the exact trap that would crush him. Evelyn pulled a secondary printout from the black folder and placed it directly in front of me. She pointed her expensive pen at a complex web of transaction routing paths. Look closely at the vendor payment grid. Evelyn instructed, her voice dropping into a clinical and precise tone. Over the last 6 months, Marcus has been exploiting a massive vulnerability in the corporate billing cycle. Every time Megatrust Bank approved a massive batch of vendor payments, Marcus manually intercepted the automated kickbacks. These are the highly lucrative corporate rebates that are legally supposed to be credited back to the bank. Instead of routing those rebates to Megatrust, Marcus secretly diverted them. I was skimming fractions of percentages off thousands of daily transfers. It is a classic white-collar embezzlement scheme, but he was executing it on a completely unprecedented scale. He siphoned the stolen funds into a shadow ledger, an untraceable digital slush fund buried deep within the AuraPay architecture. Evelyn tapped the bottom of the page. Over 6 months, he accumulated exactly $2 million. I stared at the staggering numbers on the paper. The money was just sitting there in the digital vault. But why did he leave it in the system? I asked, my mind racing to understand the mechanics of his crime. If he stole $2 million, why not just take the money and run? Because he was digitally locked out of the final step, Evelyn explained. That shadow ledger is heavily monitored by federal banking compliance algorithms. To execute an international wire transfer and dump that money into an unverified offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the AuraPay network requires a Level 5 executive security clearance. The realization slammed into me all over again. The boardroom ambush, the aggressive push to get me out of the way. Exactly. Evelyn nodded, seeing the realization wash over my face. Marcus did not care about the senior director title. He did not care about the corner office, the prestige, or managing the team. He desperately needed that Level 5 security clearance. With that specific executive administrative access, he could authorize the Cayman Islands wire transfer and completely bypass the internal fraud detection protocols. But stealing the money was only half of his problem. Evelyn continued, her expression growing even more serious. An international wire transfer of that magnitude leaves a massive digital footprint. When the Securities and Exchange Commission or the federal bank auditors eventually investigated the missing $2 million, they would trace the transaction directly back to the AuraPay mainframes. Marcus needed the executive clearance for a second, much darker reason. I needed to wipe the audit logs. I whispered the sheer criminal scale of his plan, making my blood run incredibly cold. He needed to scrub the servers entirely, Evelyn confirmed. But deleting the audit logs manually would instantly trigger an internal corporate investigation. He needed a catastrophic system failure to cover his tracks. He needed a massive digital fire to burn the evidence, and he needed a perfect scapegoat to take the blame for starting it. I was going to use his new executive clearance to inject malicious code into your predictive algorithm, Evelyn said. He was going to intentionally crash the Megatrust Bank network and point the finger at you. When the federal authorities came looking for the missing $2 million, Marcus would have handed them your broken software as the culprit. He needed the promotion to finalize the theft, and he needed you to go to federal prison so he could get away with it. Evelyn leaned across the table, her eyes completely locked onto mine, making sure I understood the absolute gravity of what she was saying. I was not just going to steal the $2 million, Chloe Evelyn stated, her voice dropping into a deadly serious register. He was going to ensure you took the fall for it entirely. Once that Cayman Islands wire transfer cleared, Marcus planned to use his new Level 5 executive access to introduce a highly aggressive malware directly into your predictive algorithms. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I listened as Evelyn detailed the sheer calculating evil of my brother-in-law. The malware was designed to trigger a catastrophic system failure during peak trading hours. Evelyn explained, it would have completely shredded the Megatrust Bank transaction grid and simultaneously wiped the internal audit trails in the resulting digital chaos. When the massive financial loss was finally detected, the AuraPay servers would be a smoking crater of corrupted data. And when the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission came looking for someone to blame, all the digital forensics would point directly back to the original architect of the software, you. The room around me seemed to spin as the horrifying reality settled in. Marcus was going to orchestrate a massive financial disaster and present me on a silver platter to the federal authorities. He was going to sit comfortably in his new suburban mansion, financed by stolen corporate funds, while I took the blame for a high-tech heist I knew absolutely nothing about. If you had stayed in that boardroom on Friday, Evelyn said softly, her words hitting me like physical blows. If you had caved to your mother, signed that intellectual property transfer, and gone back to your desk to play his obedient assistant, you would be facing 20 years in federal prison right now. You would have been the perfect scapegoat. My breathing grew shallow. My own family had aggressively pressured me to hand over the exact weapon Marcus intended to use to destroy my life. My mother had unknowingly marched me right up to the edge of a federal indictment, completely blinded by her obsession with providing Jessica a perfect, wealthy lifestyle. But you did not sign those papers, Evelyn said, a fierce, victorious smile finally returning to her face. By walking out of that boardroom and revoking your software license, you did not just save your professional dignity. You completely destroyed his entire criminal timeline. I looked down at the financial logs on the table, the puzzle pieces finally snapping together in perfect clarity. When I pulled the plug on the system Friday afternoon, I inadvertently froze the $2 million inside the internal holding vault. Because the network went dark before his promotion could be fully processed through the system. Marcus never gained the executive clearance required to authorize the final wire transfer. And more importantly, he never got the chance to inject the malware. "He is trapped," I whispered, the sheer magnitude of my accidental genius washing over me. "Exactly." Evelyn nodded, tapping the folder. "He is trapped inside a burning building of his own making, and you just padlocked all the exits. He is not screaming at your apartment door because he wants to save the Megatrust bank account. He is in absolute panic mode because the stolen $2 million is sitting in plain sight. The audit logs are completely intact, and he has absolutely no way to erase his digital fingerprints." The terror I had felt just moments ago rapidly mutated into an exhilarating rush of absolute power. Marcus thought he was the mastermind. He thought he could manipulate my family, steal my career, and send me to prison without a second thought. But by simply saying no and walking away, I had turned his elaborate heist into a federal suicide mission. A sharp vibration broke the heavy silence at our table. My smartphone buzzed aggressively against the white linen tablecloth. I looked down. The screen illuminated with a new high-priority notification. It was an email forwarded directly from my personal inbox. The sender was Vice President Richard Sterling. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. Evelyn leaned forward, her professional curiosity fully piqued as she watched my eyes scan the text. The email was an absolute masterpiece of corporate intimidation. Richard had completely abandoned any pretense of professional courtesy. He bypassed standard human resources protocols and went straight for the jugular. "Chloe," the email began, his cold formality bleeding through the screen. "Due to the catastrophic nature of your unauthorized departure and the subsequent failure of the operational grid, I am officially mandating your appearance at an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 8. You will report directly to the primary glass boardroom. Do not be late." I read the next paragraph aloud, letting Evelyn hear the sheer desperation hiding behind his aggressive corporate speak. "We are facing unprecedented client fallout," I read, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Aura Pay cannot afford any further delays. Therefore, we are offering you a one-time resolution to mitigate the massive financial damage you have caused this organization. You will arrive tomorrow morning with your personal laptop. You will restore full operational access to the predictive algorithms immediately. Furthermore, you will sign a legally binding transfer of intellectual property rights, relinquishing any claims your private entity holds over the system architecture. You will surrender the source code to Aura Pay entirely." I scrolled down to the final paragraph. This was where Richard laid all his cards on the table. This was the ultimate threat. "If you comply with those terms, we are willing to handle your abrupt departure internally." The email concluded, "If you fail to appear, or if you refuse to sign the transfer documents, we will immediately contact federal authorities. We will press maximum charges for corporate espionage, theft of company property, and intentional sabotage. We have the legal resources to ensure you spend the foreseeable future behind bars. The police will be waiting in the lobby. The choice is yours." I finished reading and slid the phone across the table to Evelyn. She picked it up and scanned the text herself. Instead of looking concerned, a wide, predatory grin spread across her face. She shook her head in sheer disbelief. "This is absolutely incredible," Evelyn said, tapping the phone screen with her index finger. "Richard is completely oblivious to the embezzlement. He actually thinks this is just a disgruntled former employee holding a software license hostage. He has absolutely no idea that his newly appointed senior director is secretly trying to rob his biggest client blind. And to make matters even better, Richard just put a massive extortion attempt in writing." I looked at the digital threat sitting on the table. Richard was trying to force my hand by dangling my physical freedom in front of me. He genuinely believed I would be terrified of a police investigation. He assumed I would run back to the office, hand over my multi-million-dollar software, and beg for mercy just to avoid a fabricated criminal charge. He thought I was weak. "He wants me to walk into that room and take the blame for the dead network right in front of the entire executive board," I pointed out, leaning back against the plush leather booth. "Then once I sign over the software out of sheer panic, Marcus can use his new security clearance to quietly finalize the transfer of the stolen $2 million. They get my software, Marcus gets the money, and I leave with nothing but a ruined reputation." Evelyn closed the black folder containing the embezzlement proof and handed it back to me. "They have set a trap," she agreed. "But they built it on a foundation of absolute ignorance. They do not realize you have the server logs. They do not realize we know about the offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And they certainly do not realize that their extortion email is the final piece of evidence we need to prove gross managerial negligence. Tomorrow morning is going to be a total bloodbath. I did not reply to Richard. I did not call my mother to cry or beg for forgiveness. I left the upscale steakhouse and went straight back to my apartment. By midnight, the city outside my window was quiet, but my mind was operating at maximum velocity. I sat at my home office desk, bathed in the cool blue light of my computer monitor, and opened my highly encrypted backup drive. During my 2 years of exclusively managing the massive financial account, I had been forced to bypass the AuraPay corporate hierarchy several times to resolve critical network issues during off hours. In doing so, I had acquired a very specific piece of data that Richard Sterling would absolutely kill for. It was the private cellular number of Bradley Mercer. Bradley Mercer was the billionaire chief executive officer of Megatrust Bank. He was a notoriously ruthless financial titan who was known for destroying entire companies before his morning coffee. Waking a man of his immense power at midnight was considered professional suicide for a standard corporate employee. But I was not a standard employee anymore. I was the only person standing between his banking empire and a massive public scandal. I picked up my smartphone, typed the 10 digits into the keypad, and pressed the green call button. The line rang once. It rang twice. On the third ring, the connection clicked open. There was no polite greeting. There was only the heavy, irritated breathing of a powerful man who was absolutely not used to unscheduled interruptions in the middle of the night. "Who is this?" a deep and gravelly voice demanded. "My name is Chloe," I said, keeping my tone absolutely level and completely devoid of any hesitation. "I am the lead software architect for the AuraPay predictive transaction algorithms. I built the system that handles your entire corporate billing network." There was a heavy, dangerous pause on the line. "The network that is currently offline and costing my bank millions of dollars in delayed transit fees," Bradley asked, his voice suddenly sharp and fully awake. "You have incredible nerve calling my personal line at midnight to apologize for your catastrophic failure." "I am not calling to apologize, Mr. Mercer," I replied firmly. "I am calling to inform you that your financial network is not experiencing a technical glitch. The system did not fail on its own. I manually shut the servers down and locked the entire grid on Friday afternoon." I heard the distinct rustle of heavy sheets. I had his absolute undivided attention now. "Why would you do that?" he demanded, the irritation in his voice instantly replaced by cold and calculating curiosity. "Because I discovered a massive security vulnerability hidden deep within your automated vendor payments." I explained smoothly. "For the past 6 months, an AuraPay executive has been actively exploiting that vulnerability. He has been manually intercepting your corporate kickbacks and funneling them into an untraceable shadow ledger. He was preparing to execute an international wire transfer to a hidden account in the Cayman Islands. If I had not severed the server connection and locked the entire system down, your bank would have lost exactly $2 million by Monday morning." The silence on the line was absolutely deafening. I could practically hear the billionaire CEO calculating the absolute magnitude of what I had just revealed to him. "Do you have the digital proof to back up these severe allegations?" Bradley finally asked, his tone dropping into a deadly quiet whisper. "I have the exact server logs, the complete transaction histories, and the destination routing codes for the offshore account," I stated confidently. "My former Vice President Richard Sterling has scheduled an emergency executive board meeting tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. He intends to forcefully seize my software to cover up the entire incident. He has absolutely no idea about the embezzlement." I paused, letting the silence build the tension in the conversation. "I suggest you attend that meeting, Mr. Mercer," I concluded. "I will see you at the AuraPay headquarters tomorrow morning." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. Richard thought he was walking into a boardroom tomorrow to execute a perfect corporate execution against a defenseless developer. He had absolutely no idea that I had just invited the ultimate apex predator to join the hunt. The next morning, I walked through the glass double doors of the AuraPay headquarters at exactly 8 o'clock. The usual frantic energy of the main financial trading floor was completely dead. The servers were still locked down, and the entire staff was whispering in panicked clusters near the break room. I did not stop to talk to anyone. I walked directly past the rows of empty cubicles and headed straight toward the primary executive boardroom. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside the room. The wolf pack was already assembled and waiting for their prey. Richard Sterling sat at the very head of the massive mahogany table, flanked by 3 highly paid corporate lawyers in expensive gray suits. Marcus sat directly to his right. My brother-in-law was leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair with an expression of absolute sickening victory plastered across his face. He looked incredibly relaxed, like a man who had already won the war. I walked calmly to the opposite end of the long table and set my silver laptop down on the polished wood. Marcus saw the computer and immediately let out a soft, arrogant chuckle. He leaned over and whispered something into the ear of the lawyer sitting next to him. Marcus actually thought I had brought the machine to surrender. He fully believed that the threat of a police investigation had broken my spirit overnight, and he assumed I was here to hand him the administrative keys to the digital kingdom. Richard did not even offer me a seat. He simply reached into his leather portfolio, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slammed them down onto the table. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he slid the paperwork aggressively across the smooth mahogany surface until it stopped inches from my hands. He placed a heavy silver pen right on top of the pages. "You made the right choice, Chloe." Richard said, his voice dripping with condescending corporate authority. "I knew you would finally see reason once you understood the absolute severity of your legal situation." I looked down at the documents. The bold text at the top of the page was clear. It was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement combined with a total surrender of all my intellectual property rights. "Sit down, open that laptop, and restore the network immediately," Richard commanded, pointing a stiff finger at my computer screen. "Once the predictive algorithms are back online and the Megatrust bank account is fully operational, you will sign every single page of that contract. You will transfer full ownership of the source code to Aura Pay. You will completely walk away from the software you built. In exchange, we will generously agree not to have you arrested for corporate espionage and intentional sabotage." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and looking at me with a fake, sympathetic smile. "Just sign the papers," Chloe Marcus said smoothly, perfectly playing the role of the concerned family member for the corporate lawyers. "We can put all this ugliness behind us. You made a terrible mistake on Friday, but Richard is giving you a very generous second chance. Do not ruin your life over a petty grudge. Just hand over the administrative access and walk away quietly." I stood at the end of the table looking at the 2 men who had conspired to destroy my entire existence. They were so incredibly confident. They were completely convinced they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They had the corporate lawyers. They had the written threats. They thought they held all the power in the room. I did not touch the silver pen. I did not open my laptop. I simply kept my hands perfectly still at my sides, maintaining absolute eye contact with Richard, and waited for the real meeting to begin. I did not reach for the silver pen. Instead, I reached down into the heavy leather tote bag resting at my feet. I wrapped my hand around the thick black binder Evelyn had prepared for me. It weighed exactly 5 pounds. We had jokingly named it the guillotine. I lifted the massive binder and slammed it down onto the polished mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the silent boardroom, causing Marcus to visibly flinch in his leather chair. I pushed the binder across the table. It slid to a halt right on top of Richard and his pathetic extortion contract. "What is this garbage?" Richard snapped his face, flushing with immediate anger. "I told you to open your laptop and restore the network. I did not ask for more of your dramatic nonsense." "I am not here to restore your network," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly calm and perfectly steady. "And I am absolutely not signing your surrender documents. You cannot legally force me to transfer the intellectual property rights to Aura Pay, because Aura Pay never had any legal claim to the software in the first place." Richard let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You signed a standard employment contract when we hired you, Chloe. We own everything you code." "Read the first page of the binder," I commanded, locking my eyes directly onto the lead corporate lawyer sitting to his left. The lawyer adjusted his expensive glasses and opened the heavy black cover. He began to read the first document. It was the official federal copyright registration certificate. It clearly listed my private limited liability company as the sole owner and creator of the entire predictive algorithm architecture. Marcus leaned over, trying to read the paperwork, a look of genuine confusion finally breaking through his arrogant facade. As my legal counsel thoroughly explained to me yesterday, I continued, my voice echoing clearly across the long room. I built the entire system on my own private servers. I coded the architecture using my own personal hardware. I strictly worked outside of my contracted hours. AuraPay was operating entirely on a free and revocable end-user license agreement. When I walked out on Friday, I simply revoked your free trial. The lead lawyer did not say a word. He frantically pulled his tablet from his briefcase and began typing, aggressively tapping directly into the federal patent and copyright database. The boardroom fell into absolute suffocating silence. The only sound was the rapid clicking of his keyboard. Richard glared at me, his confidence beginning to crack. "This is a desperate bluff," Richard hissed. "You cannot outsmart a billion-dollar corporation with fake paperwork." Suddenly, the lead lawyer stopped typing. He stared down at his tablet screen. I watched the blood completely drain from his face. He looked like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. He slowly closed the black binder and pushed it away from him. Richard turned to his legal counsel, expecting him to tear my claims apart. "Well," Richard demanded loudly, "tell her she is going to federal prison." The lawyer slowly shook his head, his hands trembling slightly on the mahogany table. "She is not bluffing," Richard the lawyer whispered, his voice completely devoid of his previous corporate arrogance. "The federal copyrights are completely verified. The timestamps are perfectly documented. The limited liability company is entirely legitimate." "What does that mean?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "It means she owns the entire system outright," the lawyer replied, looking directly at Richard with absolute dread. "The software belongs completely to her. We have absolutely no legal rights to the code. We cannot force her to turn it on, and we certainly cannot have her arrested for turning it off. We have absolutely nothing." The heavy silence in the glass boardroom was suddenly broken by the violent scraping of a chair. Marcus shot to his feet. His face was pale, glistening with a frantic layer of nervous sweat. The meticulously crafted mask of the arrogant corporate executive had completely shattered. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my face. "She is extorting us!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking loudly in the confined space. "Do not listen to a single word she says, Richard. This is not about copyrights or intellectual property. This is a massive criminal cover-up, and she is trying to silence me." Richard blinked, completely derailed by the sudden outburst. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" Richard demanded. Marcus slammed his palms down onto the mahogany table, leaning forward with manufactured outrage. I did not want to say anything until I had absolute proof. Marcus lied, the words spilling from his mouth in a frantic rush. But over the weekend, while I was reviewing the back-end transit logs for my new senior director role, I discovered a massive financial discrepancy in the Megatrust bank account. Someone has been manually intercepting their automated vendor kickbacks for the past 6 months. Someone embezzled exactly $2 million and hid it in a digital shadow ledger. The 3 corporate lawyers gasped simultaneously. Richard turned stark white. "Embezzlement," Richard repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "From the Megatrust account." "Yes," Marcus shouted, pivoting perfectly to direct his fake righteous anger toward me. "And it was her. Chloe stole the money. She used her administrative access to siphon the funds. I found the hidden digital vault on Friday morning. She must have realized that my new security clearance would expose her shadow ledger. That is why she threw that massive tantrum. That is why she locked us out of the servers. She did not take the system offline to protect her software. She crashed the entire network to destroy the audit logs and hide her tracks before the federal authorities could catch her." I stood perfectly still, watching my brother-in-law perform the most desperate and pathetic theatrical routine of his entire life. It was a masterclass in narcissistic survival. He was cornered, so he immediately weaponized his own horrific crime and tried to hang it around my neck. He was literally reading his own criminal indictment out loud and replacing his name with mine. "Arrest her!" Marcus bellowed, gesturing wildly toward the security cameras mounted in the corner of the room. "She is a federal criminal. She is trying to destroy this company to save herself. Do not let her leave this building." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking, but what was even more terrifying was how quickly Richard swallowed the bait. Richard did not care about the truth. Richard only cared about corporate survival. Marcus had just handed him a perfect, neatly packaged scapegoat. If Chloe was a rogue embezzler, AuraPay was no longer liable for the catastrophic network failure. The bank would blame me, the police would arrest me, and Richard would keep his lucrative job. Richard stood up abruptly, his posture instantly shifting from defeated to violently aggressive. He glared at me with absolute disgust. "You malicious little thief!" Richard snarled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You actually thought you could walk in here with fake legal threats and extort us after stealing $2 million from our most important client. You are completely delusional." Richard reached across the table and grabbed the heavy black desk phone. He slammed his finger down on the speaker button and dialed the front security desk. "Call the police immediately," Richard ordered the lead lawyer, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Tell the dispatcher we have a hostile corporate terrorist in the executive boardroom. And someone grab that silver laptop right now. She is not leaving this room with the digital evidence of her crimes." Marcus let out a ragged breath and slumped slightly against the table, a sickening smirk of relief washing over his sweating face. He thought his impromptu lie had saved him. He thought he had successfully flipped the trap right back onto me. I did not panic. I did not defend myself against the fabricated allegations. I just stood at the end of the mahogany table, looking past Richard and Marcus, and focused my eyes directly on the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. The timing was absolutely flawless. Before Richard could even finish his command to the security dispatcher, the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom were violently pushed open. The massive mahogany doors hit the wall with a deafening crack that made everyone in the room physically jump. The speakerphone on the table continued to emit a loud dial tone, but nobody moved to turn it off. Bradley Mercer walked through the doorway. The billionaire chief executive officer of Megatrust Bank did not look like a man who was here to negotiate a software contract. He looked like an apex predator stepping into a cage full of trapped prey. He was wearing a dark, perfectly tailored suit, and his expression was carved from absolute ice. But Bradley Mercer did not come alone. Walking perfectly in step right behind him were 4 men in dark navy windbreakers. The bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation were printed clearly across their chests. Flanking them were 2 more individuals in sharp gray suits holding leather folders and flashing the official silver badges of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. The 3 corporate lawyers simultaneously dropped their expensive pens onto the table. Richard stood frozen with his hands still hovering over the telephone receiver. The arrogant red flush completely drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, terrifying pale white. Marcus let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. He stumbled backward, his knees visibly buckling as he fell heavily back into his ergonomic leather chair. He gripped the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned completely white. The terrifying reality of his situation had just walked through the front door. "Mr. Mercer." Richard stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "What is the meaning of this? We were just handling the network situation. We have identified the rogue employee responsible for the financial sabotage. We were just calling the authorities to have her arrested." The billionaire CEO did not even look at Richard. He completely ignored the vice president of Aura Pay as if he were nothing more than a piece of office furniture. Instead, Bradley Mercer walked straight past the trembling executives, bypassed the terrified corporate lawyers, and stopped directly at the end of the long table where I was standing. He looked down at the heavy black binder sitting on the table. Then he looked up and locked his cold, calculating eyes directly onto mine. "You were completely accurate in your midnight assessment," Chloe Bradley Mercer said, his deep voice commanding absolute silence in the glass boardroom. "My internal banking auditors spent the entire night reviewing the specific transaction logs you provided. We verified every single shadow transfer. We located the hidden digital vault buried in your architecture. And we confirmed the offshore destination routing codes for the Cayman Islands." Richard let out a confused, panicked breath, his eyes darting between the billionaire and the federal agents. "Mr. Mercer," Richard interrupted desperately, grasping at straws. "I do not understand. She is the one who stole the money. She is the rogue employee. Marcus just uncovered her entire scheme." Bradley Mercer slowly turned his head to look at Richard. The sheer, unadulterated disgust on the billionaire's face was enough to make the vice president physically shrink back against the wall. "You are an absolute fool," Richard Bradley stated, his tone dripping with lethal corporate venom. "She did not steal my money. She locked down the entire server grid to prevent the money from leaving the building. My federal auditors tracked the exact user identification numbers attached to every single intercepted vendor payment over the last 6 months. They tracked the manual network overrides. They tracked the specific executive security clearance requests required to authorize the final wire transfer. Bradley Mercer raised a heavy finger and pointed it directly at Marcus, who was now audibly hyperventilating in his leather chair. "The digital fingerprints belong entirely to your newly appointed Senior Director of Operations," Bradley announced, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "He is the one who embezzled $2 million from my bank, and he is the one who is leaving this building in federal handcuffs today." I stood perfectly still, taking a slow, deep breath of the electrified air. I watched the absolute destruction of the men who had tried to destroy me. The trap I had set at midnight had officially snapped shut, and there was absolutely no escape. Evelyn Harper stepped out from the group of federal agents and walked calmly to the front of the boardroom. She did not ask for permission. She simply pulled a small encrypted flash drive from her tailored suit pocket and plugged it directly into the main presentation console. She tapped the touchscreen, and the massive glass wall behind Richard instantly illuminated. The high-definition projector displayed a heavily magnified view of the internal back-end transit logs. Evelyn tapped the screen again, highlighting a specific block of data in glowing red text. It was the undeniable digital proof. Displayed for everyone in the room to see was the exact digital signature attached to the Cayman Islands wire transfer request. It was the unique administrative login credential assigned exclusively to Marcus. The unalterable timestamp proved he had attempted to initiate the $2 million transfer just seconds after his promotion was officially entered into the corporate directory. The final shred of his arrogant illusion completely shattered. The horrifying reality of decades in federal prison crashed down on Marcus with crushing physical gravity. His legs gave out completely. Marcus collapsed onto the expensive boardroom carpet. He fell directly to his knees right in front of the billionaire bank executive, the corporate lawyers, and the federal agents. The perfectly groomed corporate mastermind was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, sobbing mess. Tears streamed rapidly down his red face, ruining his expensive silk tie. He looked up at me from the floor, his hands clasped tightly together in a desperate, frantic begging gesture. "Chloe, please!" Marcus wailed, his voice cracking hysterically as he openly wept in front of the entire room. "Please do not let them do this to me. Think about your sister. Think about Jessica. Think about the baby. You cannot send the father of your unborn niece to federal prison. We are family, Chloe. Please tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Please save me." I looked down at the man who had spent the last 6 months meticulously planning my absolute destruction. He had aggressively invaded my apartment. He had weaponized my own parents against me. He had orchestrated a multi-million-dollar heist and tried to frame me for a federal crime. And now, when the trap finally closed around his own neck, he was shamelessly hiding behind a pregnant woman he had actively placed in severe financial and legal jeopardy. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any hesitation. I looked him dead in his terrified eyes and delivered my final absolute verdict. "You do not need executive vision in a federal prison cell," Marcus stated, my voice echoing with pure icy detachment. The lead agent from the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately stepped forward. He grabbed Marcus by the back collar of his expensive suit and hauled him roughly to his feet. The sharp, heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoed loudly across the silent boardroom, sounding like the closing of a heavy vault door. Marcus sobbed uncontrollably as his arms were forcefully twisted behind his back. The federal agents did not show him an ounce of professional courtesy. They did not escort him down the private executive elevator. Instead, they pushed the heavy glass boardroom doors open and marched Marcus directly out onto the main financial trading floor. Every single employee at AuraPay completely stopped working. The frantic typing and ringing telephones ceased instantly. Hundreds of people stood up from their cubicles, their eyes wide with absolute shock. They watched in stunned, breathless silence as their newly appointed Senior Director of Operations was publicly dragged through the center aisle of the office in federal handcuffs. His pathetic, hysterical crying echoed across the massive open floor plan, serving as a final, humiliating broadcast of his absolute failure for the entire company to witness. The heavy glass doors slowly swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing the boardroom once again. The deafening silence inside the room was heavier than before. Richard stood completely paralyzed against the far wall. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. Bradley Mercer turned his attention away from the glass doors and locked his cold, unforgiving gaze directly onto the vice president. Richard opened his mouth to speak, perhaps, to offer a pathetic apology or a desperate corporate excuse, but the billionaire cut him off before he could form a single syllable. "Do not say a single word," Richard Bradley Mercer commanded, his deep voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are a grossly incompetent manager who actively promoted a federal criminal to the highest levels of your organization. You blindly handed him the security clearance he needed to rob my bank, and then you attempted to extort the only person who actually protected my assets. Effective immediately, Megatrust Bank is completely terminating our vendor contract with AuraPay. I am pulling the entire billion-dollar account out of this building today." The three corporate lawyers sitting at the mahogany table instantly dropped their heads into their hands. They knew exactly what that meant. Megatrust Bank was not just their largest client. Megatrust Bank was the only client keeping this entire corporate empire afloat. Without that massive revenue stream, AuraPay would completely default on its operational loans by the end of the week. The company was officially bankrupt. "My legal team is already contacting your board of directors." Bradley continued, stepping closer to the trembling vice president. "You are not just being fired, Richard. You are being completely terminated for gross managerial negligence and actively covering for a federal criminal. You will never work in the financial technology sector again. Building security will escort you off the premises as soon as the federal agents are finished seizing your hard drives." Richard collapsed heavily into his leather chair, a hollow, defeated shell of the arrogant executive who had tried to threaten me just 30 minutes ago. His corporate empire had completely evaporated. But I was not finished. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag one final time. I pulled out a sleek, professionally bound white folder and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of the devastated lead corporate lawyer. "What is this?" the lawyer asked, his voice completely devoid of any fight. "That is an official notice of litigation." Evelyn Harper answered smoothly, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. "My client is officially filing a $10 million civil lawsuit against AuraPay and its executive board. We are suing for severe copyright infringement, gross violation of private intellectual property rights, and documented corporate extortion. Since your company is about to file for bankruptcy, we will be legally seizing all remaining server hardware and liquidating your corporate assets to settle the damages." Richard did not even look at the lawsuit. He just stared blankly at the polished wood table, completely broken. He had tried to steal my software and send me to prison. Instead, he had lost his job, his company, and his entire professional reputation in less than an hour. I picked up my silver laptop and slid it safely into my bag. I did not offer them a goodbye. I did not look back at the ruined executives or the panicked lawyers. I simply turned around and walked out of the glass boardroom alongside Evelyn and Bradley Mercer. I stepped out onto the silent financial trading floor, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of the past 5 years completely lift from my shoulders. The corporate empire had finally fallen, and I was the one who tore it down. 3 weeks later, the heavy oak doors of my new corner office violently swung open. There was no slow build-up to their arrival. The receptionist tried to block the entrance, but my parents and my sister pushed past her with the same aggressive entitlement they had weaponized my entire life. But this time, they were not walking into my cramped apartment. They were standing in the middle of the penthouse suite of my newly established artificial intelligence firm, an entire company fully funded by an exclusive multi-million-dollar contract with Megatrust Bank. I sat behind my massive mahogany desk and looked at the ruins of my toxic family. The visual transformation was absolutely staggering. David was not wearing his crisp country club attire. He looked 10 years older, his shoulders severely slumped under the crushing weight of massive public humiliation. Susan had completely lost her perfectly manicured arrogance. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair was a mess, and she looked frantic. And Jessica, the untouchable golden child, looked entirely shattered. The expensive designer maternity clothes were gone, replaced by a wrinkled gray sweatsuit. Her fake dramatic fragility had been replaced by genuine terrifying panic. The receptionist apologized frantically from the doorway, but I raised my hand and told her it was fine. The door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone with the 3 people who had actively tried to help send me to federal prison. Susan was the first to speak. She rushed toward my desk, placing both hands flat on the cold glass surface, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. "Chloe, you have to help us." Susan sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered desperation. "The federal government froze all of our bank accounts. The lawyers took the house. Marcus was denied bail because he is a flight risk, and his public defender says he is facing 20 years in maximum security. We have absolutely nothing left." Jessica stepped forward, her face twisting into a bitter, ugly sneer that perfectly highlighted her toxic nature. "This is entirely your fault," Jessica screamed, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at my face. "You ruined my life. You sent my husband to jail. How am I supposed to raise this baby with no money and a criminal record attached to my name? You have millions of dollars now. You have this massive office. You owe me, Chloe. You have to pay for my defense lawyers, and you have to buy my house back from the bank. It is your fault we are on the street." David tried to summon his old patriarchal authority. He stood tall and glared at me, trying to intimidate me one last time. "You will write your sister a check right now," David demanded, though his voice completely lacked the booming power it once held. "You have made your point. You destroyed Marcus. But you will not let your sister and your unborn niece suffer in poverty. You are going to fix this family today." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and let a heavy, suffocating silence fill the massive room. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I looked at my mother, my father, and my sister, and I finally saw exactly who they truly were. They were parasites who had finally run out of blood to drain. "I do not owe you a single penny," I stated calmly, my voice projecting absolute finality. "I did not force Marcus to embezzle $2 million. I did not force him to plan a massive corporate cyber attack. And I certainly did not force the three of you to march into my apartment and aggressively demand that I hand over my private intellectual property to a federal criminal." I stood up from my desk, forcing them to take a physical step backward. "3 weeks ago, you stood in my living room and told me I was no longer your daughter. You were perfectly happy to let me take the fall and rot in a federal jail cell as long as Jessica got to keep her suburban mansion. You did not care about the truth. You only cared about the money. Well, the money is gone. Mega Trust Bank foreclosed on your house because it was purchased with stolen corporate funds. You chose Marcus. You made your bed, and now you get to sleep in it." Susan let out a loud, pathetic wail and fell entirely to her knees in front of my desk. "Please, Chloe." Susan begged, her hands reaching out across the carpet toward me. "We are your family. We are your blood. You cannot just abandon us to the streets." I reached across my desk and pressed the silver intercom button. "Security," I said clearly into the microphone. "I have 3 trespassers in the executive suite. Please escort them out of the building immediately and permanently revoke their access to this floor." David tried to shout. Jessica started screaming vile insults, and Susan continued to sob heavily on the carpet. But their noise meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. Within seconds, 2 large security guards entered the office and physically grabbed my parents and my sister by their arms. I watched silently as they were dragged backward out of my office, their pathetic cries echoing loudly down the marble hallway. I did not look away until the heavy oak doors firmly clicked shut, completely sealing them out of my life forever. Susan did not just cry. She collapsed entirely, her knees hitting the expensive hardwood floor of my new office with a heavy thud. She looked up at me, her face completely distorted by absolute terror and total financial ruin. "Chloe, you do not understand." Susan begged, her voice a desperate and wet gasp. "We have absolutely nothing left. The federal agents did not just arrest Marcus. They seized everything connected to his finances." David stepped forward, his former patriarchal pride entirely shattered. His hands were shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of my glass desk just to remain standing. We co-signed the mortgage for their new mansion. David confessed the shameful truth finally spilling out of his mouth. "Marcus came to us 3 months ago. He said he was getting a massive executive promotion. He showed us the new employment contracts. He showed us the massive projected salary increases. We wanted Jessica to have the perfect life, so we legally backed the loan." I stared at my father, the absolute depth of their foolishness slowly coming into perfect focus. "You backed a multi-million-dollar mortgage?" I asked, keeping my tone completely flat. "We used everything," Susan wailed from the floor, her fingers frantically clutching the edge of my desk. "We emptied our entire 401k retirement fund. We secretly signed over the property deed to our own house as collateral for the bank. But the employment contracts Marcus showed us were completely forged. He fabricated the entire promotion on paper to get the loan planning to pay it all back once he stole the $2 million from the Aura Pay servers. And now the Federal Bureau of Investigation has frozen all of our assets. Jessica screamed, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. They are foreclosing on my mansion. They are taking Mom and Dad out of their house. We cannot even buy groceries, Chloe. All of our family bank accounts are completely locked under a massive federal criminal investigation. David fell to his knees right next to my mother, the man who had aggressively demanded my absolute obedience. My entire life was now openly sobbing and begging at my feet. Please, Chloe. David pleaded, the tears finally breaking through his eyes. You have millions of dollars now. You have this massive new contract with Megatrust Bank. Please just withdraw your $10 million lawsuit against Aura Pay. Give us the money to pay off the bank. Give us the money to hire a top-tier criminal defense lawyer for Marcus. You have the power to save our house. You can save your sister. I looked down at my parents kneeling on my office floor, begging me to use my hard-earned success to bail out the exact same criminal who tried to send me to a federal prison cell just a few weeks ago. They had secretly gambled their entire financial existence on my abusive brother-in-law, completely blinded by their toxic obsession with the golden child. And now that their fake corporate prince was sitting in a maximum security jail cell, they expected me to write a massive check to fix their catastrophic mistake. You bet your entire future on a thief, I stated clearly, looking directly into my father's crying eyes. You handed over the deed to your own home to a man who actively planned to destroy my entire life. You wanted Jessica to live in a luxury mansion so badly that you funded a federal criminal. I am not withdrawing my lawsuit. I am not paying for his defense lawyers. And I am absolutely not giving you a single dollar to save the house you willingly gambled away. I reached across my desk and pressed the silver intercom button. Security, I said clearly. Please escort these 3 individuals out of my executive suite immediately. They are permanently banned from the premises. The frantic screams and the pathetic wailing amplified as the heavy security guards entered the room and physically dragged my ruined family toward the elevator. I simply turned my ergonomic chair around and looked out the massive glass window at the city skyline, enjoying the absolute beautiful silence that finally followed. I leaned forward and rested my hands flat on the cool glass surface of my desk. I looked deeply into the terrified, desperate faces of the people who used to be my parents and my sister. They were still sobbing on my floor, still begging for a financial miracle that was never going to come. They expected me to cave under the heavy, familiar guilt of familial obligation. They expected me to forget decades of emotional abuse just because they finally needed my money. I reached across the desk and firmly pressed the silver intercom button. I did not break eye contact with my mother as I spoke directly into the microphone. Security, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any emotion. I have 3 hostile trespassers in the executive suite. Send the removal team immediately. David tried to stand up, his face flashing with a sudden desperate surge of his old patriarchal anger. Chloe, he shouted, his voice cracking violently. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. You are our daughter. I stood up from my ergonomic chair and looked down at him. The sheer pathetic nature of his final defense was almost laughable. Family is not a title you only get to use when you need a human shield or a walking wallet, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute unbreakable finality across the massive office. You lost the right to call yourselves my family the moment you tried to sell me out to a federal criminal. Before any of them could scream another pathetic excuse, the heavy oak doors of my office swung open. 4 large security guards in dark suits marched into the room. They did not hesitate. They grabbed David by the arms, hauled Susan up from the carpet, and physically intercepted Jessica as she tried to lunge aggressively toward my desk. Throw them out, I commanded, turning my back to the entire chaotic scene and walking toward the massive glass window overlooking the city, and permanently revoke their access to this building. If they ever step foot in this lobby again, have them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing. The security guards forcefully dragged them backward out of the executive suite. Their frantic screams, their desperate apologies, and their toxic curses echoed loudly down the marble hallway. I did not turn around. I did not watch them leave. I just kept my eyes focused on the bright, sprawling city skyline in front of me. The heavy oak doors clicked firmly shut, instantly cutting off their noise and sealing them out of my life forever. The room fell perfectly, beautifully silent. The toxic weight that had dragged me down for 32 years was finally gone. I took a deep, clean breath of air, realizing that for the first time in my entire life, I was completely free. Exactly 1 year had passed since the heavy oak doors of my office closed on my past forever. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my new corporate headquarters. The massive skyscraper located right in the center of the financial district belonged entirely to my artificial intelligence firm. The exclusive venture capital funding provided by Megatrust Bank had permanently transformed my independent software project into a global technology enterprise. I watched the golden city lights slowly flicker to life far below me, feeling an absolute unshakable sense of peace. The universe has a beautifully brutal way of balancing the scales. You cannot build a foundation entirely on deceit and expect it to hold your weight when the storm arrives. Marcus learned that harsh lesson inside a cold federal courtroom. The presiding judge did not care about his expensive tailored suits or his arrogant corporate vocabulary. He was officially sentenced to serve 7 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There are no executive privileges in his cell block. There are no shadow ledgers to hide behind. There is just the crushing concrete reality of the consequences he finally earned. My parents and my sister also learned the devastating cost of their toxic loyalty. The federal government seized absolutely everything they owned. The massive suburban mansion was auctioned off by the banks to pay for the corporate restitution. The comfortable house my parents had lived in for over 30 years was completely repossessed. Today, David and Susan live in a tiny, badly insulated rental apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The arrogant man who used to demand absolute patriarchal authority now works as a part-time cashier just to keep the lights on. The woman who desperately prized her wealthy country club status now counts her loose change at the discount grocery store. Jessica ultimately received the exact life she desperately tried to force onto me. She is a single mother burdened with a massive mountain of legal debt she can never possibly repay. She spends her days aggressively dodging collection agency calls and struggling to afford basic necessities for her child. Her husband is a convicted federal felon, and her parents are entirely bankrupt. They built a toxic, fragile empire entirely out of lies and manipulation, and now they are spending the rest of their miserable lives buried underneath its ruins. Society will often try to tell you that family is everything. People will constantly repeat that blood is thicker than water, and that you must always forgive the people who happen to share your last name. But that is a dangerous lie designed entirely to keep you trapped in an endless cycle of abuse. Sharing genetic material does not give anyone the right to destroy your mental health. Biology does not ever excuse extortion, manipulation, or deliberate cruelty. True family is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine support, not on how much money they can extract from your success. The greatest lesson I ever learned was that walking away from toxic people is never an act of weakness. It is the ultimate display of personal strength. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep manipulative people warm. You are never obligated to hand over the keys to your life just because the people demanding them happen to be your parents. You have the absolute, undeniable right to aggressively protect your energy, your hard work, and your future. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is looking at the people holding you down, turning your back, and firmly locking the door behind you. I turned away from the massive window and walked back across the room to my mahogany desk. The security server dashboards on my computer monitors glowed a steady, brilliant green. The network was perfectly secure. The company was thriving beyond my wildest calculations. I had built an entire empire with my own 2 hands entirely on my own terms. I did not need their empty validation. I did not need their highly conditional love. I had successfully rewritten the core code of my own life, and the future belonged entirely to me. We are raised on a very specific cultural fairy tale. From the time we are little girls, we are told that family is an unbreakable bond. We are taught to deeply romanticize the concept of unconditional love. We are told that blood is thicker than water, and that true loyalty means standing by your family no matter how terribly they treat you. But I am here to tell you that this romanticized version of family is the most dangerous lie you will ever be told. It is a carefully constructed trap designed entirely to keep you locked in a cycle of endless sacrifice. To every single woman listening to this right now, I need you to hear me clearly. Unconditional love does not ever mean unconditional tolerance for abuse. Sharing a genetic lineage does not give anyone a free pass to drain your bank account, destroy your mental health, or weaponize your own hard-earned success against you. The society we live in will constantly try to guilt-trip you into staying. They will tell you to forgive and forget, because that is just what families are supposed to do. But you must never confuse toxic manipulation with genuine familial obligation. There is a very profound and brutal truth that I had to learn the hard way. You must never set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. It absolutely does not matter if those people are your parents or your siblings. When someone shows you that they only value you for what they can aggressively extract from you, you have to believe them the first time. You have to stop handing over pieces of your own soul to people who will gladly watch you burn just to light their own way. Walking away from the people who share your last name is often the hardest thing you will ever do. People will call you selfish. They will call you cold, ungrateful, and calculating. Let them say whatever they want to say while you quietly build your own empire completely out of their reach. Walking away is not giving up. Cutting ties with a toxic family is not a failure on your part. Leaving is the ultimate act of self-defense. It is the absolute highest form of self-respect you can ever achieve. Your life belongs entirely to you. Your success is yours to fiercely protect. So build your walls high. Protect your peace with everything you have, and never apologize for locking the door behind you.